such as might without morality and the issue of global citizenship. Those are two critical concepts. And when I listened to the speech, one thing that struck me was how things have changed in terms of the way the U.S. wages war these days. And that was learned from the time of Vietnam, because when you had a draft and you had so many young American soldiers being killed, there was a huge youth movement, a huge anti-war movement. And now the way the wars are fought in a different way precisely to stop that kind of movement from growing. They're fought by volunteer army. They're fought by proxy wars. They're fought mostly by air power, a lot of the use of drones. I did a study with my colleague recently when we looked at the number of airstrikes that the U.S. and its close allies have conducted since the War on Terror began. And we looked at Iraq, Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Somalia, Yemen, and Palestine, and found out that the U.S. and its allies had been dropping 46 bombs a day, every single day, for the last 20 years. Now that's extraordinary, and certainly confirms Martin Luther King's message that the U.S. was the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. There is something else that has changed as well, which is the U.S. conducts warfare in an economic way through extremely violent and brutal sanctions that the U.S. is now imposing on countries like Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, Syria, North Korea. And this is too a kind of warfare that kills oftentimes more people than the bombs kill, and that is totally hidden from the American people, but is a form of collective punishment. So we have a different way of waging war outside of the media, for the most part, outside of the view of Americans, and we've been involved in so many of these wars now for 2 decades that for young people, they see it as part of the norm, that it's been very hard to build up the same kind of anti-war movement that we had during the days of Vietnam. And this means that we have a challenge that really goes back to the heart of what Martin Luther King was calling the evils of poverty, racism, militarism, and these days we add in the environmental crisis. But the only way to build a strong anti-war movement is to connect it to these other very strong movements, and to show that the only way to transform our war economy and to cut the power of the military-industrial complex is through a Green New Deal. And that as we fight racism at home, we have to fight that same racism abroad. Defunding the police has to be the same struggle as defunding the Pentagon. Countering the increase in hate crimes against the Asian American community has to go hand in hand with a campaign to show that China is not our enemy. So we confront a huge challenge, which is basically, how do we move the U.S. from an empire to a nation among many nations that doesn't have 800 bases overseas, that brings our troops home, that has significant cut in the Pentagon budget, that rids itself as it tries to rid the world of nuclear weapons. The positive thing is that the American people are on our side, no matter which political party. The people are sick and tired of the endless wars, just as people were tired of the Vietnam War, which led us to many years of what was called the Vietnam Syndrome. And what we need is exactly what Martin Luther King called for, the revolution of values. And I would say that this is not related to political parties, whether it was Trump's crass America First or Biden's call for the U.S. to be back at the head of the table. It's the whole concept that the U.S. does not have the right, and of course today it doesn't have the ability, to be at the head of the table dictating to the rest of the world how it should conduct its business and how it should build its societies. And so our job is really to work conjunction with the domestic movements, to build a foreign policy that is based on cooperation, nonviolence, and a good new neighbor policy that we have to devise as a way of relating to the world in a totally new way than we have been doing since the time of the Vietnam War and even before that, and one that shares all the values that the other speakers have talked about tonight and is at the essence of Martin Luther King's speech.